This is the story of how America accidentally forgot an entire city. In the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, potholes, and some very suspicious looking deer, there's a town called Centralia. Well, there was a town. In 1962, an underground coal fire started burning beneath Centralia. They tried to put it out. They really did. They poked it with sticks, threw sand at it, held small, half hearted parades. Nothing worked. The fire smoldered underground, its heat creeping into homes, leaking toxic gases into the air, and causing the ground to collapse in random places. Can you imagine living with the constant fear that your front yard might just swallow you whole? Fast forward a few decades, the fire is still burning, the ground is literally collapsing, and the government basically shrugged and said, yeah, no, you guys should probably leave. But some people stayed. They were stubborn. They were part of a community that had lived here for generations. And where else could they go? It's not like real estate prices in the nearby towns were any better. And hey, if you wanted a front row seat to a literal hell on earth, Centralia was the place to be. So the government did what any rational entity would do. They relocated most of the population, bulldozed their homes, and cordoned off the town with signs warning people of imminent death by smoke inhalation. But a few people, they stuck it out. Brave, maybe. Crazy? Absolutely. And so Centralia became a ghost town with about 7 stubborn residents, most of them elderly, and a lot of smoke. The irony here is that even though it was a literal ghost town, people still came to visit. They wanted to see the site of the world's longest running fire. They wanted to take pictures of the abandoned houses, the cracked streets, and the remnants of a town that no one could save. But Centralia isn't the only case where a town fell through the cracks. Welcome to Monowi. Population 1. Yes. In the small, virtually unknown town of Monowi, Nebraska, there's a woman named Elsie Eiler who is the mayor, the bartender, the librarian, and technically the entire voting population. Every election day, she votes for herself. She approves her own liquor license. She raises taxes on herself. If she gets a fine, it's her own fault. I wish I could run a government that efficient. One woman holding down the fort of a once thriving town that now only exists in the most basic form of administration. And this raises an interesting question. At what point does a city stop being a city? When the people leave? When the government forgets? Or when even the GPS says good luck? Is Monowi technically still a town? Not really. But if you think these are isolated cases, brace yourself. There are even cities that never officially existed in the first place. There's a curious term used by historians, phantom settlements. These were towns that appeared on old maps, beautiful names, charming locations, except they never actually existed. Surveyors back in the 1800s sometimes just made stuff up to sell more land. They crafted stories around these non existent places, giving them names like Glenwood or Silvercrest, places that buyers could get excited about. They were pitched as the next big city, but in reality, they were nothing but marketing gimmicks. A hopeful venture for some settlers who wanted to believe in their dreams of prosperity. Buyers would show up, deeds in hand, expecting a cozy little village with a general store and a blacksmith, and find a muddy field, a cow, and a very confused squirrel. Honestly, this might be the original NFT. You bought it, but it only existed in theory. Back then, people didn't have the access to detailed surveys or the internet. They trusted these supposed experts who told them of these grand towns and their booming potential. They were sold on the dream of a better life, only to find out that the settlement they paid for was nothing more than a figment of someone's imagination, or worse, a blatant scam. A community where their hopes and dreams were going to flourish. But all they got were abandoned plots of land that were never more than a marketing ploy. One such place was Glenwood, a town that only existed on paper, not in reality. Surveyors carved out the names, designed the streets on their maps, and sold it off to the unsuspecting. People came eager to start afresh. And what did they find? Nothing. Nothing but empty land and an occasional abandoned cart. Some decided to stay and live in tents. Others, disillusioned, left never to return. Glenwood became a perfect metaphor for the failed promises of industrial expansion. Yet, what really defines a settlement as a ghost town? Or is there more to it? Is a ghost town only a ghost when the government stops acknowledging it, even when it is still there? The truth is, some ghost towns were never towns to begin with. They were ideas, dreams packaged as reality and sold off to anyone willing to buy. Think about the name Hogtown, another phantom settlement. It was supposedly located near the American South, known for its fertile land and bustling market. But in reality, it was an open field with a few scattered homes and a particularly grumpy pig. How could anyone fall for it? But these weren't isolated cases. These were not anomalies, they were the system. The system that saw people's dreams and aspirations as commodities to be packaged, sold, and forgotten. Now think about it. What happens when a government or even a society forgets you? You cease to exist. You'll find them on old maps lost in the pages of history books or whispered about by old-timers who remember what it was like before it all vanished into the mist. All of this, the fires, the forgotten towns, the imaginary cities, makes you wonder if a city disappears and no one is around to file the paperwork, did it ever really exist? In the end, forgotten cities aren't just bizarre accidents, they're windows into how fragile civilization really is. One typo, one fire, one missing census report, and poof, your entire existence becomes a footnote. Makes you think twice about renewing your driver's license, doesn't it? You would think that after all these years, people would learn to be cautious about these types of things. But the truth is, we're still making the same mistakes. For example, did you know that there are towns in America that don't exist anymore? Their existence is just a matter of paper. They were erased without anyone even noticing. Take Justice, Illinois, for example. The town was incorporated back in the 1950s and was known for its small, tight-knit community. But in the 1980s, the city's leadership was caught up in a scandal of corruption. So the state decided that the best way to handle this was to simply merge Justice with the neighboring town. No one bothered to check on the community. The name Justice remained on the map for years, but there was no government, no services, and no funding to support it. And yet, Justice continued to exist on paper, a phantom town in its own right. And there's also Dogtown, a neighborhood in St. Louis, Missouri. This town was once a vibrant working class area, but by the 1960s, it was completely abandoned. There were still buildings standing, streets paved, and empty houses scattered throughout, but no one lived there anymore. The city didn't bother to tear it down or repurpose it. Instead, it remained on city maps as a place, despite having no population or infrastructure. For years, Dogtown existed in a state of forgotten limbo. But the most incredible thing about towns like Dogtown and Justice is that the people in these places weren't just abandoned by their governments, they were erased. Forgotten not only by the authorities, but also by the people themselves. Even the people who lived there for generations couldn't seem to recall what happened to their community. Think about how much history is just swept under the rug. Stories like these are not unusual. They happen all the time. They happen in places where people still live today, unaware that their cities might be next on the chopping block. The difference now is that we have technology that makes us feel safe, maps, GPS, Google Earth, things that make us believe we can trace every inch of the planet. But the truth is, we still don't know what's happening to all the people and places that fall through the cracks. In fact, it's not just forgotten towns that disappear from the map. Entire neighborhoods do too. Sometimes it's as if the ground itself swallows these places whole and they never existed in the first place. Take Levittown, New York. Yes, the place that's famous for its post-World War II suburban development. Many of its homes were built quickly and cheaply to house returning soldiers, But the idea of Levittown wasn't just about homes, it was about creating a brand new identity. At its peak, Levittown was considered a symbol of the American dream, the perfect, affordable community for hardworking families. But as the decades wore on, the dream started to fade. Levittown has been changing ever since. And what you know? People started leaving. Some houses became rentals, others got abandoned. The once idyllic suburban paradise is slowly crumbling. Yet the name Levittown is still associated with the ideal American neighborhood. How names can outlive the thing they represent? How a piece of land once full of life can just fade into the background, never to be remembered again except as a footnote in a history book. And yet we still search for new places to build, new cities to create, because we can't seem to stop believing that we can do better. We think the next town, the next project, the next dream will be the one that works, and perhaps it will. But the sad truth is, for every place that succeeds, there are dozens more that will vanish.